What is going on, guys? It's the Mad Dragon. So South Africa and Wales have just finished their second test of the July internationals, and what a bizarre game. I mean, that was just a very odd game across the board. If you are new to rugby and you want to watch a bunch of people scoring tries, this is not the game for you. This is very much for the hardcore fan who's looking at tactics and little nitty gritty things going on in a game of rugby. Slow scoring. Felt a bit reminiscent of the World Cup semi-final, if that makes sense to everyone. An awful lot about kicking, just controlling the speed of the game. Not a lot of tries, not a lot of points scored, but overall quite an intense and exciting game. So as we have done, we've already done some of the other match reports. We've done New Zealand versus Ireland and Australia versus England. They're already up on the channel, so you can check them out after this one is finished. So let's move on and talk about the first half of this game. So it was a really nice day over there, to be fair. Stadium looked packed. There must have been a really nice atmosphere going in there. And in the first 5 minutes is the entire scoring. The entire scoring for the first half happened in the first minute. Within 10 seconds, Wales got a penalty immediately from the kickoff. Peter Steph du Toit going straight off his feet, which just led to an immediate penalty for Wales. 10 seconds in, Dan Biggar slotted that one through the post to take a 3-0 lead. And South Africa counted immediately. Moving back up the field, George North not releasing the ball on the floor. The Springboks kicked into the Wales 22. They got a nice little line-out moving, and then they moved it through the players up to the 5-metre line. There was an awful lot of penalty advantages. Wales just desperately trying to hold them off from scoring a very early try. Eventually, penalty was conceded, and Andre Pollard just voted to take the 3 back. So in minute 3, we get to 3-0 each. And that's it. That's the score. That's the rest of the first half. So I have 3 pages of notes about nothing being scored, which is quite incredible. So basically, throughout this half, we get to see it's turn-taking penalties is basically the way it goes. There's an awful lot of stop-starts in this game. No one really getting the most momentum. South Africa definitely felt like they had the majority of carrying the ball, time with ball in possession throughout it. But there is an awful lot of penalties. It's very sort of 50-50 in terms of penalties. Up to the 10-minute marker after that was pretty much South Africa. All out attack, a lot of energy. You could tell these were new lads, first caps, desperate to try and show off. There was an awful lot of pace, an awful lot of ferocity coming from them. It was really nice to see. Wales did manage to win a couple of penalties. Tommy Raffel, absolutely brilliant in this game in terms of the jackal penalties, won a good number of them. I think at least 3 or 4 throughout the game. Absolutely fantastic in terms of his work rate. Wales got another penalty in the 12th minute. Joseph Dwebber having a tackle off the ball on Will Rowlands. Just a slightly misjudged sort of run, tackled the wrong player off the ball. Wales did actually manage to win a free kick at the scrum. Now, scrum was going to be a big area for this game. An awful lot of changes to this South African team. Putting out a second team, but not necessarily like a B team. When we say second team, you tend to think of a lower team. This was more like a second Springboks team. It's really beginning to show the depth in this South Africa team. To make 14 changes and have a game come so close against, a tier 1 Wales team, it's extremely scary in terms of looking towards a World Cup from an outside perspective. Like, South Africa could be building to have quite an immense team by the time that World Cup comes around. But scrummaging was going to be one of the areas to look at, and for the first half, I would say scrummaging was quite even. Both teams sort of winning penalties, maybe the odd free kick here or there. Wales did take the first one, though, so they felt a bit confident going in terms of that scrummaging area. Unfortunately, Wales did lose Cuthbert very early on. It took 16 minutes before Cuthbert came off. He actually looked like he was having a relatively decent game in terms of catching the ball high from some of the box kicks going on. I think he picked up a bit of a wrist injury. It's quite hard to judge what actually happened. He sort of limped off, sort of holding, I don't know whether maybe shoulder or wrist injury. But Josh Adams came on. South Africa won a penalty at the next scrum, so they got a bit of confidence going back there. Gareth Thomas just dropped instantly as soon as they engaged. There was then a penalty attempt by Andre Pollard. It was quite far out. It was about 45 metres, just steering slightly wide of the post. Dan Biggar actually missed one previously. I forgot to mention that. He had another one from about the same position, 45 metres out. He missed one as well. One of the big concerns coming out of this game really now is the Wales line-out. There was an awful lot of issues, especially in that first half with Ryan Elias throwing. There was a couple of penalties for dummy throwing in the line-out and not straight in the line-out. I have to say, I think Evan Etzebeth was the absolute correct call as the only person to remain in that Springboks team. The disruption caused by him in the lineouts was pretty devastating. Wales really struggled to have any sort of platform to launch from across this. It's quite hard to do a review of this game because there's so many penalties. Everything is just penalties going along, taken in turns, but no one really generating any momentum from them. South Africa did take charge later on in that first half, moving towards a sort of 30-minute marker. It began to feel like South Africa were beginning to settle down a bit. They were beginning to go through some phases. They were beginning to make some ground. Though I said here, there was some better game management from South Africa. They no longer were just just sort of running sporadically. You could tell it maybe wasn't their entire first string starting 15 who just went out there believing they were going to just be able to beat Wales. This one felt more like there was a rigid game plan, something they'd organised pre-hand. They definitely were considering this test to be a professional test. They were going for the points when they could take them. They weren't really messing about too much. They had a game plan in mind, which was really nice to see from South Africa. One of the things that I did like was the fullback. With a different setup that I've not seen from South Africa before. As I've said in a couple of videos, forgive me for pronunciations, I do try my best when it comes down to some of the South African pronunciation. I believe it's like Gelant. Was the fullback player. I do try my best. Some people have been really helpful in some of the comments trying to give me some phonetic spellings. But he moved in to be almost like an acting fly half, which is really nice in terms of the way South Africa play. We don't really get to see that. So an entirely new team bringing new tactics in was quite nice to see. And it actually was working quite well in that first half. Having Andre Pollard on one side and the fullback on the other side, doing almost what we see with England in terms of like Fowler, Marcus Smith, having two distributors, two fly halves, really splitting the Wales defence up. And I think it worked really well. They kicked Wales back into their own half an awful lot of the time. The kicking from South Africa, far better this game. I don't think a lot of South African subscribers will be saying too many bad things about the kicking in comparison to Elton Yantes and Faf de Klerk from last week. I thought the kicking was much improved, far more on point, far better kick chasing, far more reliable ability to get under the ball. Hendrikse was actually really good in terms of the scrum half. I thought he had a much better game than Faf de Klerk did last week. Wales lost their scrum quite badly in the 30th minute. They really began to just start getting driven back. It took about 30 minutes for that scrum to start looking a little bit wobbly. They did manage to scramble it back, and Wales kicked it back into touch. The South African line-out pretty steady for the majority of it. There was a couple of issues that in sort of later on in that second half, but for the majority were looking pretty good. Wales did manage to get another penalty then in the 35th minute. Again, Rafael, just brilliant in terms of that jackal rate, was absolutely killing South Africa in terms of that breakdown. One of the only players I want to actually add, there wasn't really a lot of turnovers coming from Wales in terms of the breakdown, but Tommy Rafael, absolutely on it. Wales moved up to about the halfway line, and it's the first time we really get to see Wales. They did a nice little bit of phase play coming from that line-out. They were playing some passes down the line. Wales, again, like I said at the end of the last video we did in terms of the last game, Wales just not really building an attack, and it was quite apparent again in this game. Just not really building anything, repeatedly going to the kicking, going to box kicking. There seemed to be like as if this was like a game plan, which I'm sure it must have been. There was so much box kicking, so much kicking from the fly half, only playing two phases, kicking the ball back down, hoping South Africa would maybe mess up or have a kick chase go right. It didn't really feel like Wales were able to actually penetrate that line. So here was the first time, I actually think I said, it was the first set of passes from Wales. 5 passes in a row, and it was then kicked along the ground by Liam Williams, which didn't really amount to anything. It took 31 minutes to get to that situation where they were actually beginning to string some passes along. It's not really something we saw from Wales in that first half. A few minutes later, we did actually see another attack coming from Wales. They tried to get this in towards the end of that first half. The first proper attack I've got written down here from Wales. The first proper attack coming in the 36 minutes, spreading it wide, going out to Zamet with a lovely little pop pass back down. Liam Williams managing to run, make a bit of room. But then again, the grubber kick into the South African 22. And in terms of territory games, it's something useful. It's something teams use quite well. Unfortunately, the South Africa line-out was doing so well, it wasn't really amounting to anything. And as I said here, it was just a nice clean exit from South Africa, putting Wales back on the halfway line. So they're mounting these attacks. They're trying to pin South Africa back. But to be fair, for quite a new South Africa team, they really exited well in an awful lot of this game. And we went into half-time, 3-3. It literally didn't change from that point on in that first 3 minutes. I did take one of the stats down, which I thought was quite important to note here. Wales playing this, not really going on the attack, really played this absorbing defensive game. We saw this last week, and it didn't really work how they wanted to. There was too many holes in defence, too many line breaks coming along. But again, in one of these stats here, meters made at half-time, South Africa 184, Wales 34. You know, it's what is that, like 6 times the amount of meters made by South Africa just on the offensive. So in terms of a Wales defence and, you know, points conceded, considering how much South Africa are actually making room, Wales actually did relatively well at just being able to control the game, not letting South Africa score points. Of course, there was a couple of missed kicks here and there in terms of towards the post, but for the majority, Wales actually managed to stop South Africa from scoring. So I was quite impressed by that. The only thing that I was really wanting was to see Wales actually build their own attack. So in terms of my notes at halftime, I had both teams are holding well in terms of defence, both teams not really giving way. South Africa look like they are more in charge, more attacking, but just not converting that final 10% into points. Again, we actually saw this last week as well. Just those last few passes, maybe a drop ball, maybe the driving ball's working really well, but a player would run out and be classed as obstructing the next player in the train, just not quite getting to the end. And if they just managed to gel together, they would get some more points on the board. The Wales defence is looking good, but as soon as there's a line break, again, we're jumping to that immediate penalty. And there was a couple in this first half from George North, from Will Rowlands. A couple of these players just immediately sealing off the ball, not releasing the player. As soon as that tackle break got made, the scramble defence is good. They're making the tackles. They aren't actually letting South Africa get over that try line, but they just aren't managing to just hold that defensive line and not release the penalties, which just gave South Africa more chance to move up. Wales very slow from rucks, which was making the South African defence easier. Now, this is one point which I don't think was picked up on in the commentary team. The Wales recycling speed was so slow. It must have been in 4, 5, 6 seconds. South Africa felt like they were speeding up the ball far, far more. Kieran Hardy really wasn't in any rush. There was a couple of really nice counter rucks from South Africa that actually drove Wales back over their own ruck because the ball was coming out so slow. And while that was maybe part of the kicking game, they were setting up for more of these box kicks. What it does mean is that the South African defence had so long to just set up. So even if there was a chance for Wales to break through, as soon as that pass was getting to the first receiver, South Africa were absolutely ready. 2-on-1 tackles, absolutely smashing into the player. So it just put Wales on the back foot more often than it probably needed to in that first half. And then finally, like I said, Wales not really creating an attack, basically just kicking to gain ground, but not actually taking the ground from South Africa. So I just wanted to see some attack at some point in this game from Wales, and it didn't really happen in that first half. South Africa were clearly more on the offensive. A couple of the new boys coming on now. Roos was on it, absolutely wanted to smash through some players. I see why so many people were talking about him leading up to this game. I've also got written down Esterhazen, hopefully I got the pronunciation right on that, in terms of that inside centre. Also fantastic in terms of carrying of the ball, really putting Wales on the back foot. They had to just tackle him immediately, and they really used him like that crash ball 12. He did say in one of the pre-game things he was going to run through players rather than around them. Really showed off. So a lot of nice carries, a lot of nice information coming across from some of these new boys, some of these lesser cap players, really showing off in this game, which is nice, and I'm sure South African coaches will be pretty happy. In terms of the second half, we saw that immediate shift. The front rows got replaced at half-time pretty much from the South African perspective. Malcolm Marx and Vincent Koch coming on. So big switch up there. Thomas Williams came on for Kieran Hardy, which I was a bit 50-50 on. I didn't think Kieran Hardy was doing terribly. Just the speed from the back of the ruck would have been nice to have seen sped up. The first points going in this half coming from Pollard in the 43rd minute. Again, another penalty. Will Rowlands hand beyond the ball. Again, immediate penalty. South Africa broke the line. The next tackle made, Will Rowlands immediate forcing that penalty there. Andre Pollard taking that then to 6-3. Wales almost had the opportunity to close that gap a little bit. South Africa offside from immediately from that restart. Dan Biggar did actually miss that kick, so they remain that 6-3 up. In the 48th minute, Wales actually managed to win a penalty in the scrum, which was really nice to see. South Africa on the break foot again. There was a couple of calls for this in that game. They'll want to just dial down that little bit, not really getting that scrum set up as they wanted to. Managed to kick into the South Africa half. It was a good line out, and Wales tried to make an attack, but the defence from South Africa was absolutely ferocious, and eventually it led to a nice jackal penalty from Malcolm Marx, who came on, made a real impact from the game, from the bench. Really nice to see. They kicked up to the Wales 22, and again, as soon as they started making that room, South Africa get their penalty back again, and that one was converted by Andre Pollard, taking it to 9-3. South Africa had the chance only 2 minutes later to extend that lead again. They were back on the attack, linking up. The passing was actually flowing a bit better now. It looked like that South African team got over that bit of rust at the start of the game. They were getting into it a bit more. They made even more meters, but there was a South Africa penalty for Lydiate not rolling away after making a tackle again. They broke the line, just not releasing those players. Now, Andre Pollard missed this one, which was a little bit surprising. He had a pretty good kicking day, but that one was a bit of a miss. And in terms of the final score, what a big thing to miss. It was really hard to call from 50 minutes in how big that penalty was going to be. Moving towards the final quarter then, where we have the only real controversial area of this one. I would say there was an awful lot in last week's game. This one came from a yellow card going to Alwyn Jones. Again, South Africa on another really nice attack. Peter Steph du Toit making a lovely little break down the wing. Managed to make some really good grounds, and Nick Tompkins managed to get a recovery tackle in there. Now, the yellow card was awarded to Alwyn Jones. The basis of this was that the referee believed that Alwyn Jones put a hand into the ruck and raked the ball back and knocked it into touch. Now, Wales protested this a lot, and now every rugby player protests a lot when a penalty is against them, but they really looked like they meant it. We did go back and have it on the replay, and it looked like he didn't even touch the ball to me. The call actually came from the touch judge, and the referee immediately blew the whistle and just gave the yellow card immediately for it because South Africa on the attack. It clearly ended the attack for them. But it didn't look to me like the penalty actually happened. I'm really surprised the TMO did not jump in and go back over that, considering it was on the cameras. They had a good while before they moved on to the next penalty. So I'm not really sure what that was for. South Africa did kick to the corner. They got a driving maul. Wales actually managed to stop this driving maul pretty well. Didn't necessarily sack it, but actually stopped it in its tracks. Really hard to do against the South Africa team. But they did eventually manage to just wheel it round. Player came in from the side, and there was another penalty awarded, which Pollard managed to kick this time. So it's now 12-3 to South Africa in the final 20 minutes, and it looks like this game could just be going the way of the Springboks. However, the last 20 minutes worth of notes, pretty much everything I have written down here is about Wales, which is quite surprising because thinking back about it, it didn't feel like Wales were doing an awful lot, mainly coming from Eben Etzebeth. A couple of penalties mounting on him. Now, he did have one really nice steal at the line-out, but it did bounce back into touch, so they didn't manage to really gain anything from that. Wales managed to get back in control of the ball and moving up the field, and South Africa had a penalty against them for not releasing, and Anscombe went for the post. Now, I thought this was a big call. They were quite far behind. It wasn't in a terrible position. I thought it was quite a big call, but it did manage to draw them back now to 12-6. Wales did have the opportunity to close up the gap a little bit in the 67th minute when there was an offside penalty against Etzebeth, which they kicked to a line-out, and then Etzebeth gave another penalty away for grabbing the arm in the line-out. Now, Anscombe took this penalty, and it did miss, and I really thought at that point, rather than going for the post on that one, that could have been the one to go for the corner with. I thought potentially that was the game over there. We get through to the 72nd minute, and Wales' first actual phase-based attack is what I've got written down here. 72 minutes it took, but Wales finally managing to put some strings of passes together, some phases together, trying to find those little gaps in the South African defence, which held up extremely well. I've got down here, Hendrickse, very good in terms of just holding out that defence. Wales eventually did drop the ball and will run all the way back to their own 22. Some really nice pressure from some of the South African backs. Now, the Wales attack wasn't really looking like it had a great deal of tactics about it, though. Basically, they were moving forward through these phases, absolutely, but not really making a lot of ground. In terms of players actually being on the offensive, it looked like players were desperately looking for the likes of Zammit, Liam Williams, Josh Adams to do anything. They didn't really look like any of them were planning in the attack. They didn't really look like a setup. It was a lot of loose ball. They were basically hoping that one of them would be able to get around. I really wanted to see them just settle down and go through some phases and put South Africa on the back foot. It all boiled down to the final 5 minutes when Wales eventually had a scrum and managed to win a penalty at the scrum, going against the new prop that came on. And hopefully I can pronounce his name right. I believe it's Mukunu. The prop that came on, stepping out in the scrum, tight, a little bit harsh potentially, but I think I agree that he was the one to step out in that scrum. Wales kicked up to the 5 metres line. There was a really nice line out. They actually got that one bang on. That's exactly what they wanted to do. South Africa dropped them all deliberately. It actually looked like it was potentially going to be rolling over for a try. They managed to shut that one down. A lot of advantage there. Wales would go for the pick and go, and the South African defence manages to hold out these pick and goes all the way from the touchline all the way to the middle of the posts, where Wales decide to change tactics. They spread it wide. It goes out to Josh Adams, who had a lot of work to do, had to go round one of the South African defenders and managed to get right in the corner for a try in the 79th minute of the game, giving Anscombe an incredibly hard kick. I mean, if you were Anscombe, you'd be wanting your forwards to be driving that under the post. I was screaming. I really thought they've lost the game because Anscombe's going to, potentially not kick this one. He's already missed one. But Anscombe did manage to get this unbelievable kick right from the touchline to slot it through to take Wales in the lead for the first time in the game, I think, apart from in the first 10 seconds, really, at 13-12. They kicked off again. South Africa did manage to recycle the ball. They went back on the offensive. Wales did manage to hold out a scrum really well. Was very, very impressed in the 80th minutes to hold out against that South Africa scrum, not giving a penalty away, keep your discipline, and eventually it led through this South Africa attack to a knock-on by Vincent Koch, and it eventually meant that the game ended full-time. Wales managing to win. The first time ever Wales have beaten South Africa in South Africa. A historic win for them, and it now means that the Northern Hemisphere have won 3 of 3 so far in the second round. Absolutely incredible. I tried to get some of the stats for this game. Sky Sports was awful in terms of providing stats at the end of the Wales-South Africa game for whatever reason. But what an incredible comeback. I really didn't know what the Wales game plan was going to be. It was incredibly slow. They were just trying to use these kicks. They were basically waiting for the opportunity to open up. And if South Africa could have just kept that discipline, for the last 5 minutes of the game, this game could have easily been potentially 12-3. I think South Africa will feel really down by the fact they lost this game. This was absolutely a game that could have been won, especially there was missed kicks towards the post, which could have won it for them. But I think they'll take a lot of positives by the fact that they made 14 changes going into this team and still kept this team and only lost by a point. And only lost by a point right at the end due to Gareth Anscombe having this incredible kick from the touchline, which I think an awful lot of fly halves could have easily missed as well. It still could have been a win there. So I think South Africa will take an awful lot of positives away from this game. Wales, on the other hand, I think they'll be happy to have won this game. It's a historic win, so there's a lot of positives to take away from it. Finally managing to beat South Africa. A little bit of redemption from the World Cup semi-final, I guess. This game actually played out a bit like that semi-final. So I guess there's some real positives in there. I still think there's a couple of issues in this Wales attack scheme, though. They don't really seem to be building anything throughout this test. Leading into Test 3, I want to be seeing Wales actually create an attack. The first time in the game, it looked like Wales generated their own attack from start to finish. It ended in a try. And I'm not going to take anything away from the South African defence there, because the South African defence was awesome in that game. It really limited what Wales could do in terms of the attack. But I just want to see them build on that a lot more. For South Africa, though, I think there's an awful lot of promise coming in from some of these new lads. A lot of new caps, a lot of low-capped players. Taking on a strong Wales team, so I think they'll be awfully happy. But what a tight match. I'm really looking forward to see what you guys thought of the game. Make sure you do drop it down in the comments, whether you're a Springboks fan or a Wales game. What did you think of the game? Was that the result you thought was going to happen? I really love reading through the comments, especially when I picked in the Super Brew. I did actually pick Wales to win in the Super Brew in terms of the predictor series we've got going on. And I picked Wales by 3 to win this game. They won eventually by 1, which is, even tighter than that. But when I did pick that on Super Brew, I did put it on the channel. That Super Brew actually gave me a warning message to make sure that was the team I wanted to pick. Obviously, Super Brew and a lot of the world don't believe that Wales are going to be able to win that one. And even as it came to the 75th minute, I still didn't think Wales were potentially going to win that one. So an awfully big comeback from Wales. So well done to them. But that's going to be it for me today, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. If you did, remember to leave this video a like. And if you enjoy any part of this content, remember to subscribe to the channel. You can always unsubscribe later on if you really feel like you want to. I hope you all enjoyed this one today, guys. I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.